my mom would always ask about, hey, where's my whatever Nordic track exercise equipment? I said, oh, I turned that into a sled. Like you weren't using it for 8 months.
Welcome to Talk Tuesday, a webinar series where we explore what it takes to kickstart new projects, launch new products, and create the right conditions for team success. I'm Eric Gorman, founder of Wiley, an agency that helps teams innovate faster with less risk through our sprint workshops and training. We help teams get aligned, eliminate unproductive meetings, and make rapid progress using our interactive, repeatable sprint workshops. Skill up with our training at wearewiley.com. And now to our guest. All right, it's my now great pleasure to introduce our friend and special guest, Jeff Grant, Director of Innovation at InVue. Welcome, Jeff.
Hey, Eric, thanks for having me. Good to see you virtually again.
Yeah, it's good to see you too, man. We're overdue for it, so we'll get that on here soon. We're going to dive into all things InVue in just a bit, but I wanted to start a conversation, maybe just kick us off by telling us a little bit about yourself and as well as a little bit about your kind of professional journey leading up to your current role.
Oh, wow, that's a big question here. So I grew up as, I think, a classic tinkerer, inventor. I was always in the garage building stuff. A lot of things exploded. My mom would always ask about, hey, where's my whatever Nordic track exercise equipment? I said, oh, I turned that into a sled. Like you weren't using it for 8 months. Apparently that wasn't a legitimate excuse, but so all my friends and family, neighbors knew me as like the inventor, always making stuff, very resourceful. We didn't have a lot of money, so I would scrounge things and make things. One time I made a pillow out of saving the lint from the dryer for like a month, and I used that as a stuffing, so that was a pretty good win for me. But I would say I think my family and people who knew me thought I was either going to grow up to be like an inventor or maybe a terrorist. My high school sweetheart, her younger sister actually one time actually got to know me better. She's like, Jeff, your brain works somewhere like it's a very fine line between creative and criminal. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but at the end of high school, I was voted, they had to make a new category for me when you do the most likely to. So I was voted most likely to be killed by a total stranger. And that goes to my, I guess, lack of awareness of making certain jokes in certain situations. Like, Jeff, one of these days you're going to make the wrong joke and the wrong person, and they're going to have a knife. So anyway, I haven't changed that, and I'm still alive.
You're very, very playful and creative. Yeah, I love it, though.
Yeah. So I think that probably maps to what you've experienced with me, Eric.
100%.
But I ended up going to Stanford. I was a student athlete there, wrestled. I worked a lot, worked at a couple of cool programs and projects. I thought I was going to go into physics because that's what I really loved in high school. And then I discovered product design my freshman year, and which was really kind of like the beginning of the mechanical engineering track and also what's called product design. So basically the first couple of years are the same engineering fundamentals, but then as you get in your junior or senior year, you get into more commercial product design focused types of things instead of like the hardcore thermodynamics and that kind of stuff.
Is the physics thing like an interest or thing of yours? Like, I mean, I guess it kind of
still is
on the engineering side,
it's
right?
Definitely, yeah. It's funny because my physics teacher in high school, I told him I think I want to do mechanical engineering. I didn't know anything about anything. He's like, oh no, Jeff, you're more hands-on. Mechanical engineering is very theoretical. You need to do physics much more applied. Is like, I think you could say the same for either of those. It really depends on how you approach it. But I am a much more applied person. I like to take the theories and get hands-on with things very quickly. But that being said, I went to Stanford. It was a great experience being exposed to a lot of different things. One of the coolest things was, in these engineering, I did more product design focused classes. We had faculty members who were from like the department, like they're tenured professors. We also had adjunct professors who were from profession that came in. So you got a blend of the theoretical world and the real world. I did get the pleasure of meeting Condoleezza Rice twice at Stanford. She was actually, before she became a national security advisor for the Bush administration, she was actually a student provost at Stanford. I met her twice. First, I was being praised actually for the work as a student engineer on a NASA program. This is where that physics came in. I was doing a NASA-sponsored program as a student engineer that was trying to test Einstein's theory of relativity, which the probe actually launched a couple years after I graduated. But so I have some parts flying around in space. That was the first time. And then the second time, I was reprimanded for violating safety rules at graduation for the stunt that I orchestrated, which made it to the front page of the paper, which was my goal. So twice with rice.
Love it.
So that's, and so I did product design. I loved it, and did a great job with that, and that kind of thrust me into it. And I actually got one of my other jobs during Stanford was actually from a professor who had a company on the side. He actually worked at the company that became IDEO before it became IDEO, but he branched off before it officially became IDEO. And he launched a company with a partner called Skyline Products, which was a toy invention licensing business model. So coming up with a concept for toys, games, juvenile products, and pitching them to the big manufacturers. And if they took them on, then you get participate in the upside of the market success. And if it didn't have market success, then well, you didn't eat. So that was kind of how I cut my teeth early on during school. And that was my first job after doing that for about 10 years. Had about 100 products that I worked on that license that made it to market, including a product called Fib Fighter, which was at the time in early 2000s was the best-selling tween-age girl party game. And it was invented by a bunch of guys in their 20s, including myself. So
there's a great in the Talking to Humans by Constable, I think. He talks about there's like a cartoon and says, you basically need to go out and talk to your customers, and he's like, and the commercial or the cartoon is basically like, yeah, but we leave this cool studio and it's a bunch of like old white men trying to design things for young teenage girls. So anyway, it's like perfectly on point.
Also, the toy industry is not as bad as you think it is. It's not like watching Tom Hanks and Big. You go to a lot of these mid-market size companies, like you walk in, it's like, besides the sign that says this is the toy company outside, it's like a brownstone building. It's like, is this like an insurance company or, what do they do? Yeah. You have no idea. So anyway, I'm not sure if I answered your question, but that was sort of the early days. And eventually I moved out to Charlotte, for family reasons about 17 years ago. And I went from working at IDEO. Actually, I worked at IDEO because Skyline got sold back into IDEO by the time that I graduated. So I became part of IDEO through that means and ran that group.
How long?
10 years.
10 years, okay.
About 10 years total at Skyline as an independent, but also as a studio of IDEO. At one point, we rebranded the name to 020, so we focused on anything from 0 to 20 years old kind of focus area. But I learned a lot there because our business model was, I called it how to make a lot of magic for no money. And that means we didn't have a lot of volume costs or bill of material. We couldn't spend a lot of money to make the magic happen. Had to find really clever ways to create the experience without throwing money at it. And also because our business model was speculative, we weren't getting paid for the work we were doing. We got paid if it succeeded. And like any kind of portfolio of things where there's no guarantee, you have a handful of things that actually pay the bills. Everything else is a loss. So we have to get really scrappy at making things really quickly and low cost and getting to the essence of it so we can pitch a lot of ideas and see which ones are going to hit. So it almost became a luxury looking at a place like InVue now where we just have a lot more resources. The price points are different and we can afford to throw things at it. So coming from that very constrained environment, it's almost like having a superpower in like quote the real world, I'd say.
That's awesome. Yeah, there's like you got some amazing stories. So you were a guest facilitator at our 2018-2019 boot camp. A lot of hoopla around that. We brought in Jake Knapp and from Google Fiber leading day one. You were leading our prototype day two. So I know from that experience and all the conversations we've had over the years, like there's so many threads we could pull and really awesome stories. The Fib Finder, like how that came out into being was hilarious too. That whole story is really, really pretty cool. So maybe we'll come back to some of that at the end, or we'll have to have a follow-up conversation. But I want to kind of tell us a little bit more about your current role. Like give us a lay of the land of InVue.
Okay.
What kind of, what values is right with our clients, who's their target, size of the company a little bit, and then maybe dive into your role a bit more.
Okay. Yeah. So I've been at InVue for 14 and a half years now. So coming up with 15. It's a private company. We're about 150 million or so typically in sales per year with high margins. Private company, but we work across about 90 plus countries. So about half of our revenues in the US and the other half is the rest of the world. We have around 200 employees globally, most of them here in Charlotte, but we have people spread out in different countries who are our employees that are from a sales perspective. What InVue does, Oh, and I'm head of innovation for the company. So my team, we've been intact for a while now. We're coming up on 60 years of experience, 4 of us together, kind of a cross-functional innovation team. But what InVue focuses on, there's really 3 business categories that we operate in, what we call asset protection, access control, and point of sale. Those are kind of the 3 kind of product solution categories. And we have different verticals, markets that we go to market in with those solution sets. But in general, way to think about it is if you go to like a T-Mobile store and you're shopping for a next smartphone you want, those phones are just sitting on a table. They're sitting on some sort of apparatus. The apparatus has to maintain physical security, but also provide some customer experience, has to power up the phone, it has to do all sorts of things, and then just make it work at retail for a demonstration unit. So you can say, yeah, that's what I want to engage with, and I want to buy it. And then they could actually buy things, and that could be protected by a smart lock or something in some other cabinet. So we provide all the technology and solution capabilities so that people can showcase and demonstrate the products that they're trying to sell, and then ultimately, secure those assets and create a great experience. So if you start going like Best Buys and T-Mobiles around in the US, you'll see our nameplate InVue on the backs of a lot of the products. It's one of those things that's funny. Like before I got into this business, I just never paid attention to that stuff. But it's like hidden in plain sight. It's everywhere you look, and so you realize there's a bunch of bad guys out there who's trying to steal stuff that you don't think about, which surprised me because I have a very creative criminal mind, and I thought I would have known about this before somebody told me about it.
So right.
But that's kind of the main business. But again, we also work in different verticals. So we've done some things with data centers, some critical infrastructure. Mobile point of sale might be in retail, but it also could be in different venues like hospitality or banking. So we have some pretty clever solutions that are to help solve some needs and just sort of the new way people want to be untethered from their tabletop in terms of transacting and interacting with customers, kind of going to where the customers are versus forcing them to come to your pedestal to transact.
Feels like the tech and the solutions you provide are much more salient, I think, with some of basically the organized crime that's happened, COVID influenced that, or whatever the factors are that brought that about. It's definitely more prevalent and easier to spot. It's more in your face than it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think another thing is most people know about it now. Like I think 5 years ago, you told people what we did, that it was like, yeah, I'm kind of tangentially aware of these types of things, but it wasn't in the national spotlight. But you can't read a link today without it talking about a gang of thieves coming in, wiping out a store or stores closing down because stuff is out of hand. It's very much in the national and global, attention space right now.
Yeah. So talk to us a little bit, you mentioned this multidisciplinary team, and we glossed over the fact, I think you were starting to talk about your story of coming to Charlotte, working for B of A at the time. We didn't mention that because you also spearheaded a team, led a team, developed a team around innovation at B of A too, which is no small feat given the culture there and, giant.
Yeah.
That's a huge feat. So maybe we'll come back to that. I think we might come back to that very topic, but sticking to InVue, like tell us a little bit about that multidisciplinary team, what's it comprised of, and then maybe like dive into a little bit of like how you guys create the conditions that allow you to kind of create the magic of what you do.
Okay.
Want to talk about that.
Yeah, so a lot to unpack there, but basically my team, we're cross-functional in the sense that we all work together on all the projects, but we each have our different specialties. So, we have one guy who's really like the mechanical wizard, right? He can just make anything work out of thin air mechanically, figure out the really clever mechanism, that kind of thing. We have a guy who can do that with electronics, same thing with electronics and firmware. A guy who can do that with sort of IoT space stuff, so kind of prototyping things that might be a web app or an actual app in the future, but like how do you prototype that experience early? And then of course creating the presentations and all the graphics and the user experience. So that's really the cross functionality, is like the ability to kind of make anything real. I call it real fast. So that's one of our headlines, is like we make things real fast. And why? Because it goes back to that when I talk about Toy mentioned, like not everything's going to hit. So you don't want to apply equal energy and effort and resource investment in everything, know that not everything's going to hit. And what we work on is what's called phase 0. So we're at the very tip of the spear, where before we're pre-development. We're basically saying, what should we be working on? What should InVue do next? Where should we spend our capital in terms of resources and investment and time? It's going to give us our biggest ROI on that investment. So we spend a lot of time up front just figuring out what's the next it and what is the right it. this is a good distinction too. A lot of times people are too early focused on, can we do it? Could we do it? And try to prove technical feasibility. We do a little bit of that as part of the process, but our main question we're trying to ask ourselves and customers in the market is, what should we do? Because if we can get to the answer of the should, first of all, if the should is no, and it didn't matter whether it was possible or not, that was all wasted effort. If the answer ultimately is you shouldn't be doing this, who cares if you could have done it? Why spend any effort proving that you could or could not do it if you shouldn't have done it? Now, if the answer is yes, you should be doing it, well, at least now you know what the should is, and now you can more laser focus on what is the critical questions on the technical feasibility. A lot of times things are already figured out. It's just a couple of new things that haven't been figured out, and you can isolate those and say, hey, that's the long pole. Those need to be vetted early. There may be risk factors in development, but we want to make sure that we're going to spend the next, 12 months on a development and maybe $1 million. It's the right thing to work on. We vetted the solution correctly, but more importantly, we vetted the problem correctly. And that's really what we do. We help. And so we kind of live in between, kind of commercial facing, market facing, customer facing, like what's going on, what are the problems, and also engineering and the how internally. And we could speak all the language. I could speak on behalf of engineering in terms of like, is it possible? I'll kind of use that engineering judgment assessment, but also make sure the engineering knows why we're doing something. Why is it important to have this feature? Not just that it's on the requirements document, but like what led to it being there? What was the story? What was the specific story we heard, or set of stories, or the why? That may not be obvious. People are like, why would we do this? It's just adding cost and complexity, but what's the reason? So we do a lot of like kind of translating that human and technical side of things, and really a trifecta of human, technical, and business factors that we're looking at the front end. And it's very iterative. But as far as how we go about things is we work with our product category leads who are trying to drive their categories for next generation products. We're working with some of our lead flagship customers who are kind of the big ones in the different spaces to kind of lead the charge. And we work with them directly. We show them early concepts. We try to get what I call lab and or live test of new concepts early, because to me, that's one of the best metrics is before we even decide to invest in something, if I can convince somebody to actually try something, it sounds like that's a low bar, like, oh, of course they will try, but not really in a corporate setting, because that person has to basically stick their neck out. They have to spend time and energy. They have reputational risk. If it doesn't work, they've got to spin up, different cross-functional departments to kind of get involved. They have to explain, why are we doing this? So the fact that I can get somebody to say, hey, I'm willing to do that in a lab and or a live store test or context test, that means it must be important enough that they're willing to do that. So to me, that's a really great indicator of what we're working on is big enough, juicy enough. It's important enough that they're willing to do this now versus not be the guinea pig and wait for us to maybe commercialize it 18 months later or whatever, be the beneficiary with no skin in the game. So that's, I think, as far as leading teams and whatnot, is if you could find people who are willing to do that, that's a good metric or barometric, kind of measurement of, are you on the right track?
How much, like, if you think about your team and the teams you work with, I mean, whether it's IDEO, InVue, InVue, like, how much of it, I'm curious if you could step back and like, how much of this is that you have a really, really great people that get this mindset of like test and learn, or how much of it is you? Because I think my perspective at talking and knowing you, Jeff, for a long time is that it's really unfair because you're really good at a lot of different things and you just kind of get the mindset and you have this really tremendous experience. I say unfair, kind of tongue in cheek, but like, I think some of these lessons take many inventors, many creators, product team leaders, like years and years and years to arrive at the whole fact that you need to have this confluence of real customer need, technical capabilities, as well as the business perspective, plus telling the story, finding the story and cultivating. And I think you naturally are doing lots of things that you probably take for granted or that many people just don't quite have that perspective. So how much of it is like, are you finding like-minded people that already get it, or are you kind of just bringing a lot of the heat and special sauce to the table and it's kind of contagious as a result?
I think it's actually both in the last thing you said. I think for sure now, the last few years, there's a lot more awareness of test and learn and these sort of design thinking processes and design sprints. So I think there's a lot more people like you and others have done a great job of sort of seeding that in the mind space of people. So it's not a foreign concept. So there's a lot of more appetite for it. Doesn't mean they know how to do it or they're going to be effective. It's sort of like saying, I want to dance salsa and I've seen some videos. Doesn't mean my body can do it. And so I've actually tried it, done some practices. But the good news is, it's hard to sell something where there's no awareness and no desire in the first place. I've learned that from selling concepts at a young age. You can't sell it if there's no groundwork for it to be sold, right? It has to be the right time, and I think the time is right where a lot of people are willing to do it, but there is still a lot of lack of guidance and experience doing it. So I think that's where, my, I guess, core experiences and capabilities come into play. Like we're able to do it pretty effectively. So we can guide clients to it. We can guide ourselves through it, or, we have maybe new people in the organization or whatever. But I think that the whole point there is that success breeds success. So one, you have to have the mindset that we're going to do it this way, and push back when people say, let's do a pilot, and then let's go like, hold on, what do you mean a pilot? How do you even know this is the right thing? A pilot assumes everything's been figured out, and we're just trying to work out the kinks before we go to production. So I have to do a lot of lexicon training. We're not doing a pilot, it's a proof of concept. We're actually, before we get to proof of concept, you need to do a proof of technology, because we don't even know if the technology, yes, we have to figure out that should, but this one actually is so dependent specifically on a could technology that we have to also do that. So it depends on kind of diagnosing what is the problem to solve, what are things we need to do, and how do we test and what are we testing? So are we trying to test if people would actually like it? That's a very different question, whether it will work, right? Mm-hmm. So guiding people through that, having those conversations, it's actually fairly easy, but they want to have examples. So luckily, we have a lot of examples here, especially with our customer. We can say, hey, remember when we did it that one time? Or another thing is reminding people of the big failures. Like, hey, you remember when we spent $1 million in a year and we did this thing? When in retrospect, we could have done this small experiment and we would have learned the exact same answer and saved ourselves that time and cost and money and the lost opportunity. That slot that would have been, that was dedicated to a dog, would have been dedicated to something that would have got a playback return on a resume. Like, and I do just as much storytelling on I call it Remember the Alamo. Remember the Project X that was a dog, and not just to rub it in people's face, but like, remember how we tripped over or talked ourselves into going down that path through belief, versus we could have stepped back and said, how do we test the theory? And usually there's a very quick, low cost way to test whether this is should we do it or should not do it. I remember, I didn't mention it, we did spend a while back $1 million in a year to do this down rep product concept for the China market. We thought, hey, we think we got it. But they're saying is they want the 900 series, the 960 thing. We're going to call it the 850, some other number, some smaller number. It's going to look like the product, but it's going to have a little bit less features that we think is applicable for that market. And we went out and spent $1 million to develop this product, and we basically sold goose egg. And I remember thinking, like, man, this is the early days when I first got to India. We're still figuring things out. I remember thinking, wait a minute, if you really diagnose what they're saying is, I want the 960 product, but I want it at this lower price. Well, we said, shoot, if we sell at that lower price, we're going to have super razor thin margins. We can't afford to do that. So we need to de-feature it and cost reduce it, right? Well, that was the premise, assuming they would buy that feature set. But how do you test it? Well, what we should have done is just taken that product and offered it at that price, made very low margins, proved that the market was there for the product and the feature set. And then if they actually bought it, they, hey, we can see the right under wall. We keep it this clip. We're going to have low margins. But if we actually go spend the money now, at some point we'll recoup it. But we did the opposite. And it turns out it wasn't even there were so many other issues than our assumptions that we could have tested out by just saying, okay, fine, let's put your money where your mouth is. Buy our current product at the price you say you will. See if they buy it. It's not like we were going to lose money. We just were going to make as much as we wanted to. But we could have done that and then said, hey guys, at this clip, now we know what we're leaving on the table every single time we ship this order. Let's go do the development to go, we'll spend the $1 million, but we can now reclaim it after however many months. And of course, in this case, the answer would have been, okay, let's just stop selling it. We're not making the money, and there's not enough to do the development. So that would have been a great experiment. We could have done completely zero development, but I was just analyzing the factors at play and saying, what business move we want to make? And that's the thing people don't realize is it's not always making a new solution or product is the answer. Sometimes it's tinkering with business commercial terms or creating this experiment will test the motivation behind people. Test that if they say, I'm not buying it because of X, well, find a way to prove that it's really X or if it's some hidden Y or Z that I'm not telling you because they don't want to hurt your feelings or they've got something else going on. But you got to find a way to test these things very quickly before spending a lot of money to find out the issue you could have tested quickly.
I find like, so I do this stuff I'm in the same sandbox as you in terms of innovation. And I'm not doing the same, like you're doing real product development for a giant business, and it's incredible. I'm consulting. And I find like for Wiley, my business, like it's really freaking hard to do what I say, to do the things that like drink my own Kool-Aid basically, right? So I often say, do as I say, not as I do. And it's actually really hard. I mean, so when you shared that story, it's like, it's kind of like, it's easy to revert back or to slip into those defaults, because those defaults it's like a gravitational pull where you lose sight of the fact that, hey, this is a step and it's a long journey, and we're trying to, again, just focus on one key learning at a time. And then you touched on something else that I wanted to come back to, which was, I mean, there's a couple different things rattling around my brain. One of them was around, you often will, there's a saying that you used to say at our boot camps, and it stuck with me, which is like, there's kind of three key things when you're trying to develop a new product, something new, launch something new to the world. One of them is the technology already exists? Does it meet a real human need? And does it require behavior change? So I want to dive into like change piece, but I also wanted to share just quickly that, the opportunity cost that you mentioned. That was the thing that was had like, I try to communicate that to my clients. Like that is, it's tremendous, because not only is it the time and money that you're spending, but there's actually a huge, from my perspective, a huge detriment to the team when you fail flat on your face, right? It hurts, and it actually can set your team back and pull them apart. So I don't know if I pulled a lot of threads there. Take it where you want, but
I'll just reiterate the last thing you said. It's important. You got to set up your team for success, because they don't want to be on the dog side of things. They don't want to be on the losing team. And that, as I said, success breeds success, and failure, it can be a good impetus for new success if you take the right lessons learned and apply it. But it also can be a downward spiral, right? If you especially if it's a long cycle, but a year, and you spend all this time, effort, blood, sweat, and tears, and go, why? And then it's a lot of finger pointing and like, why didn't we even do this? And you just feel bad about yourself. So that's the true cost. So people don't, I guess, a lot of times they don't quantify that. Well, it's already a sunk cost. Well, it's a sunk cost because you decided to invest in it. Like the whole point was to make a return on that investment of that expense. So it is, I think the opportunity cost is one of the bigger things that people don't focus on. They could talk about top side new stuff, but it's really you do have a set sort of resources. Are you going to maximize that, or are you going to erode that, right? And that's really where you're going to get the gains. But going back to the three factors, kind of AE, product, initiative, business, what I say about those three is that you have to nail all three, because if you don't, you're almost doomed for failure. And if you nail all three, there's still no guarantee for success, but at least you're at the starting line, you can run the race, right? But don't even start the race if you're missing one of the three. And the point of like, is there a real problem solved? That means, that's kind of basic table stakes. Because if it's not, you might have a business there, but it may be a fad. It may be kind of a fleeting solution and having sustaining power. The technology part is like, I use the example of like, I'm back on Little House on the Prairie days, and Laura Zingelwild said, "Hey, Pa, I solved the problem to our potatoes going rotten when we try to sell them in the different townships, and like I found the solution. Like, well, what's the solution? We got to solve that. How our family will stay alive. Like, it's called a cell phone. We're gonna call ahead and see if they need our potatoes before we drive there in our horse and buggy. It's like that doesn't work. I mean, cell phones don't exist. The cell towers don't exist. Other people. I mean, it's so far fetched, right? So you can't be science fiction with this. You have to take the technology. It might not be a technology your company has, and we've done this a lot in InVue where we didn't have the technology in house, but the world did, and so we had to go find it, either borrow it, build it, buy it, learn from it, consult on it. But it has to exist somewhere. It has to be within the time frame of your development. Otherwise, there's no shot. And I think a lot of people creating solutions, products around emerging technology, it's not vetted yet, not even released yet, and it's a very slippery slope, because even when the technology exists, you have a high chance of failure, let alone pinning it to some technology that it's outside of your control. But that third one is the most important and most overlooked, which is, and I'll kind of expound on my rule, I guess, is it's thou shalt not require the user to significantly change behavior or culture in order to be the beneficiary of said solution, something to that effect. Like, it's great that you can have a new solution on the stuff and solve the problem, and it does it with technology that either exists or you can adapt. But if ultimately what you're asking the customer or user to do is such a significant change in order to get that benefit, good luck. And my best analogy for that is weight loss. If I want to lose weight for any reason, let's say what's the reason? So the whole problem space, it could be because I need to be healthier. That's a legitimate reason. It could even be a vanity thing. I need to be thinner. Well, I might be a model. I might need to do that for my job, whatever. There could be a whole host of reasons why I need to lose weight. Does the technology exist? Absolutely. There's 1,001 completely different things that are all effective. The technology exists. Does it require you to significantly change your culture or behavior in order to get the benefit? Yeah, that's the problem. That's why it's so hard. That's why a lot of these things don't work long term, because it does require such a change. So what I'll say is, you have to spend a lot of time asking yourself, as we put this thing out there, are we requiring a significant change? Because if we are, that's a huge potential risk barrier to adoption and acceptance and adoption, acceptance, and utilization. But what's ironic, or maybe not ironic, it's just inspiring, is that if you can go about it the right way and you don't require that change, mostly some of the best products cause change. They actually inspire, encourage, and enable change. And I'll give you an example, no pun intended, but one of the things that IDEO worked on before I left back in 2006, before I moved to Charlotte, was a project called Keep the Change for Bank of America. And Keep the Change was centered around how to help people kind of save automatically. And there was a big problem with people that are under saved, I guess, if you want it, kind of living paycheck to paycheck, they don't have a lot of savings. So basically the concept was you click a button to enroll and say, hey, every time I use my debit card, if I've enrolled and Keep the Change, it's going to automatically round up whatever my purchase is at the store. If it's $13.87, it's going to round up to $14. That change basically goes from one account to another account. And then as an incentive, they match it dollar for dollar up to, I think $100 or whatever for the first year. And then now you can see your savings grow kind of automatically. So problem solved, check. Technology exists. Yeah, they had the technology. They just had to click a button to enable it for the user. Did it R&D behavior change? No, you basically just did what you normally did and it happened automatically. But here's the cool thing. I remember when I first moved here in 2007, I started interviewing some neighbors and friends who actually were Keep the Change users, because I thought of it as a great example of a story, kind of where I formulated the three-part theory. And the fourth thing is the bonus, which is it will cause behavior change if it's done right. And I remember one of my neighbors was telling me that, like, yeah, I love Keep the Change. When I go out to eat now, I get to control the tip. So I always leave a tip like 01. It'll be like, $98.01, because that means I control the value. It's now 99-cent match or rollover and a 99-cent match. So it kind of gamifies the system, right? Then another guy said, oh yeah, when I go to the gas station, I'll play with the pump and I'll try to do, $1.01, and I'll stop it and ring it up. And then I'll do it again. I'll do that as many times as I can until the gas station attendant comes out and says, what are you doing? Like, cause he's getting mad at me because, he's getting charged the interchange fee for every transaction. He's expecting 1 per fill up, not 27 per fill up. And so he said, yeah, it's a fun game to see how many I can get before the guy says, you can just let the gas flow and don't keep changing the thing. But it's a great example of, like, if you look back at some of the best things, it's like, none of us said we needed a smartphone. Nobody said we need to do this, and nobody wanted to change behavior. But think of all the behavior changes that have been caused by a smartphone being so easy. Every app that could ever be invented has been invented and will be invented to meet the demands of anything you want to accomplish, and you just do it, right? And imagine going back to a world where we didn't have that, like how hard it would be, right?
Oh yeah, remember pulling out maps trying to find your way instead of not having GPS, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We did it, I don't know, but
I always caution people to really think about that customer experience and journey. Are you asking, even on, like, how do they know about it? How do they enroll it? How do they what does it take if they like it and they physically get it home? I mean, what are the barriers? Basically, barriers to use, barriers to try in it, barriers to continue use. Those are all the things you have to look at. And it's much more than the value prop of the solution, much more than the feature set, the pricing. People spend a lot of time on that, but they overlook well, how would one go about actually using this then in real life?
Man, we have blown through our time, and I feel like we just started scratching the surface. going to have to continue the conversation in a subsequent Talk Tuesday. Jeff, thank you so much for your time. It's been amazing, insightful, as always. Really, really always enjoy your humor, your creativity, playfulness, and your stories. You've got great stories. So we're going to have to do this again. But thank you so much, Jeff.
All right, we'll do it again. Thanks, Eric. Good to see you, man. Take care.
I'm Jake Knapp, and I'm the creator of the Design Sprint process. I'm the author of this book, Sprints, and I am here at the Wiley offices in Charlotte, North Carolina. This right here, if you were thinking about maybe doing a design sprint with Wiley, this is where you would be, at this table, probably, unless you do it at your office, which is totally an option, but right here in this space with a whiteboard, with a bunch of paper and pens. Basically, they're going to help you think through the problem, get it started, and get a solution tested really rapidly. That's the whole idea with a design sprint. I'd highly recommend, if you're thinking about it, that you do give Wiley a chance to your project. I've worked with these folks a couple times, and they always exceed my expectations. I always do things a little bit better than I could have imagined ahead of time. They're also really nice. So don't tell them I told you that. I try to, keep it cool, but they're super nice people. Anyway, best of luck to you, and try Sprint.